Thank goodness there are these pesky people called artists, you know, like me, who don't want to leave the galaxy in such a, you know, bland and barren kind of a state. So, I have written some material, and I shall read, but I think you'll understand the value of me reading, somewhat like a poet might read something. And it goes like this. The entire universe was a whirl of shimmering dark soul. She stood 30 light years across and was 3 trillion years in the making. She had within that delicious and potent grand flux of dark soul the sparkling pieces of love that began to swarm freely in the fine mix. You picture that, you know, little pieces of love all separated by all these dark things. Right. Over what eventually became known as time, those small pieces of pure love found each other and packed themselves together into larger and larger celestial bodies. So here these particles of light come together, join up, attracted naturally to each other, and become more solid and more solid. Naturally they look kind of round because that's how it works. As they hustled in toward each other, the mass created by these highly charged attractive particles began to show up as light, especially if the orb was viewed from outside its mass. And that was the beginning of the noticing. These balls of love eventually became suns and then stars, and they gave shape to the galaxies that began to swim around them for light and warmth. They had the attractive pull of love and the gifts of heat and light to give nourishment to the others assembling in the void. And the noticing grew stronger. Many smaller orbs assembled, but also never quite attained the mass and the heat of the larger stars. They themselves also had visible surfaces now shining in the starlight. The edges of these celestial bodies could now be seen at what became to be called the event horizon. It was here that the tears of joy formed when life appeared to just notice that the universe itself was alive. These tears eventually became oceans, and the Great Lakes, so needed for the many life forms to grow and populate these outer orbs, some now call planets. The noticing grew. In this grand unfolding, there were beings that remembered precious events and moments. They also could observe and reflect on the events around them, and this finally stopped the knowing into segments of time. The grand flux thus began to take on the quality of knowing itself, and the noticing flourished. The conscious beings that emerged and evolved also began their journeys through the stars, and thus the stories of life began to shape the very crest of awakening. And then time flourished into history. That birthed what was called the shining. That's a Balinese idea. There are five elements. The shining, I think, is the same one that the Chinese call metal. At moments, everything would stop again if the shining was strong enough, and that became known as heaven. Some of the beings were able to merge with the shining more and more, and when those beings found each other, they could create heaven almost anywhere when they let the primordial force of love shine through. Okay, these are suggested relationships and collections of mechanics and attractions and etc., which we don't know any less to be true than what we've been told about God and all of those other things. In the thinnest film called the biosphere on some planets, billions of life forms appeared. So that combination of water and light in a condensed form produced this fuzzy edge, which all green and stuff. They eventually developed relationships that allowed the grand flux of soul to feel itself as a theater of life itself. So this is something getting to know itself by being more and more aware. To make better sense of their world, they all assigned the power and glory of creation to the province of godlike beings and made in their own image. Yeah, so what other story were they going to come up with? Hey, they're smarter than we are and bigger and more holy, and there's probably a mom and a dad, and no, they probably had holy kids. Every single tribe on planet Earth has this story. They just gave them Baba, Mama, different names. So the magic of life was then contained in the moments at the edge of the awakening when the noticing burst into unspeakable joy. Whoa. So instead of just heat and light, you have heat and light inside of awake beings, and that feels like joy. In each of the beings there then forged a new center of love that was in many ways the same sweet force as the larger bodies of the stars. But there was one critical difference. The transmissions of this hearth energy could be transmitted and directed to others until the treasured feeling of home was secured again. So the grand flux accepted that thoughtful extensions of heat and light from one awake entity to another was acceptable to it, just like the way love in the form of heat and light was attracted to itself until it found itself in balls that then became stars and sun. And when such beams were exchanged directly among what came to be called the people, that's when the noticing flourished and the promise of life was realized again and again. And the noticing became God. P.S. God is a verb. Okay? So, thanks, scientists. But hey, let's add a little color to the picture, okay? Just mumbling to you here from the Grand Hillock, next to the beautiful lotus pond, in a place I call my yard, on its way to becoming paradise. No excuses. Thank you, bye.